So.
Are you finding your ICQ number is 4 digits?
No, it was ellipsis because I just made it up. I couldn't even remember. Like, I didn't know if an ICQ number starting with 2 was even valid. Like, I had no idea. So, and I wasn't going to go look up my old ICQ number. Anyway, so you really don't care who I am. Why am I giving this talk? 2 reasons. One, I've been doing cybersecurity a long time, and I think there's some interesting threads to pull on as far as people, going on in your career and things that you might find interesting and useful. The other is kind of this weird concept that we always say the internet doesn't forget, but it sure as shit seems to forget the important stuff that you want it to remember. So as an example, I grew up in upstate New York, and I put all my shit in a duffel bag when I was 18, and I went to Alaska. My life was changed forever because I just decided to go do that. I had a full ride to Cornell, could have gone to any school I wanted, and instead I went to state school in Alaska. And as part of that journey, I ended up working for Internet Alaska, which became the largest internet service provider in the state in the mid-90s. And it was very formative for me. I'm going to go through a lot of what I went through and what the state went through at large. But a few months ago, I was talking to somebody about Internet Alaska, and I went like, oh, there's got to be articles on this. There's got to be someone who's written a thing on the history of the internet to Alaska and that kind of thing. Turns out, no. And in fact, most of the ISPs that existed at the time, there's no evidence of existing at all, right? The people who are at the pointy end of the spear are bringing internet to the state of Alaska. The stories and all of it behind what they did, there was, at best, there's a couple of pages on archive.org that you could stitch together, but it's never been held in a cogent way before. So this is my attempt to try to help the internet remember a little bit. So before I get started, I have a little secret for you all. I can't leave this room, but I wasn't sure if you're aware that Alaska is a big fucking state. Okay, like it is. This is 19 other states shoved inside of Alaska. It is a remarkably large landmass, and there are very few people in it. There are 3 cities, and then a whole bunch of little towns and villages and whatever. Anchorage is not the state capital, but is the largest city in the state by a long shot. Maybe 300,000 people, 400,000, something like that. Anchorage is weird because it's got water and mountains, and that's it. So like when you leave the Anchorage Basin, you just kind of like run out of the city and like life disappears. And then Juneau, the state capital, is down here in the southeast, over here. And you can't get to it by road. You have to take a ferry or a plane. It's the only way to get to Juneau. And then places like Unalaska and Dutch Harbor down here in the Aleutians, fucking Barrows way up at the top, gnomes hiding out here on the west coast, and they're spread apart by hundreds of miles with no roads, right? And we had to build a network to cover all this. So before we get into the specifics of what we did, I just want to go back in the time machine and talk about the state of the internet in 1990. Okay, in 1989, the first dial-up internet, the world by Software Tool and Die started, and somewhat questionable legality, regulatory universe where they allowed connection to the non-commercial internet in '89. They were the first dial-up outside, and they were based outside of Boston. And there was some grumpiness about it, and then quickly the internet got taken over by heathens, so it ended up not mattering. But the world was the first dial-up in 1989. AOL came to be through a series of evolutions around that time. For those that weren't born yet, AOL started out life as like its own little online universe where they had their own services and boards, all these things that you go to. And then as the internet evolved, you would actually click a button to go to the internet, right? Because you would leave AOL's walled garden and you would go off and go to the internet. So UUNet was arguably the first commercial internet service provider providing dedicated circuits to originally ARPANET and NSFNet. And then in the early 90s, the internet started to commercialize and started to allow connections from non-governmental, non-military, non-educational entities. And UUNet was the first provider of services for that. So 1990, not that fucking long ago, the commercial internet really did not exist, right? We were just starting to get people access to a broader worldwide network. At the same time, 1990 in the state of Alaska, you had kind of 3 competing statewide networks, not competing in the sense that they were taking each other's business, but they were largely running over the same underlying physical infrastructure. You had the Office of Information Technology for the state of Alaska running all the weird shit that states do. Yeah, the Department of Defense, there's, I don't know if you know, there's big military bases in Alaska, just a few, and DoD made a pretty heavy investment in making sure strategic bombers and other things had nice warm places to be, like Fairbanks. So they've got their own network. And then the University of Alaska system has their own network, largely divvied up between what at the time was University of Alaska Southeast, which is just like a collection of campuses in Southeast Alaska, UAA, which was at the time a 2-year institution in Anchorage, and then UAF, which was the only 4-year institution in the entire state. UAF is known for its Geophysical Institute. There's a lot of people give it a lot of money from oil companies and that kind of thing. So by the time I got there in '93, that is a supercomputing center. We had a Cray YMP and a Cray T3D. They did a lot of like geophysics research, which is really where's all the fucking oil. And but it paid handsomely, and that meant they had a lot of network connection and that kind of thing. Has anyone been to Alaska? Has anyone been outside the cruise ship corridor? Hey, awesome, outstanding. So this down here is like where everyone goes on their cruises, Southeast Alaska. It looks a lot like, I don't know, Seattle, except it's slightly colder. And there's a lot of these little tiny communities around there. University of Alaska Southeast was really like a focal point for community down there. It was a way for people to communicate. Heidi had an account on the UAS Vax when she was like 8 or whatever. And would, yeah, she wrote man pages on the Vax system there in the late 80s. Not to date how old she is, but anyway. So pivotal to our story is this man, Lance Ahern. Lance is one of the co-founders of Internet Alaska, is really probably the reason that Alaskan Internet took off like it did. I interviewed him as part of this presentation. This is a quote from Lance. When I asked him, like, what caused you to get into this? And it was basically, he was a nerd. He was doing tech stuff, working servers and that kind of thing. And he read this report from AT&T that said, like, right now people are connecting up to this network at about 300 baud. In 20 years, it'll be 150 megabits. That's a lot of zeros to add on in a short period of time. He saw the opportunity. He recognized it was something that he could potentially play a role in and make some money at. So he went at it. So he ended up deciding to start an ISP. And we'll get into the mechanics of it specifically, but I want to introduce the players first. He was working on it, and his wife, Tamis, was working at the time, Arco, which has the tallest building in both Anchorage and the entire goddamn state. It's a 20-story building. By the time I left Internet Alaska, we had a data center up there on the 20th floor. We had the highest computers in the state that weren't airborne. And for some goddamn reason, it wasn't anywhere near a CO, but we got the space, and so we did it. So Lance was standing this thing up, and his wife wanted to help him out. And so she put up flyers at the Arco building, which is now the ConocoPhillips building, and it spent some time as the Bank of America building in between. Put some flyers up and was like, hey, we're standing up a dial-up internet provider. If you're interested, give us a call and we'll put you on the list. It's basically just trying to seed it, see who might be interested in that kind of thing. And then this gentleman, Matt Manhart, he was working at Arco at the time, and he found it. He saw the flyer, and he called Lance. And he said, hey, I'm really interested. When do you think you're going to be online? And Lance is like, I got no fucking idea. I got the dial-up part figured out, but I have to go. Like, my DNS server stood up, and an authentication server, and all this kind of stuff. He's like, I can't figure it out. And Matt's like, coincidentally, that's what I do for Arco. Let me come by and help. So Matt drives over to Lance's house. They hit it off. And next thing you know, they decided to go into business together. Matt quit his job. He actually took a leave of absence. He just never went back. He quit his job. Lance had quit his job. And they decided they were going to start this internet service provider in 1994. Matt's quote is this. Matt was a very silent person. He was the kind of person you just didn't want to disappoint. Right? Like, he owned all the infrastructure, and he was very possessive about it. He was also very opinionated about how to do it. For people that were at the opening remarks when Russ said, has anyone ever edited a SendMail CF file? It turns out, you know what you're not supposed to do? Never fucking edit the CF file, right? It's supposed to be generated through an M4 file through some transformation that occurs. But Matt was a believer like, oh no, we're going to hand edit this CF. And this CF file that we had handled everything that the company did. And we had UUCP. Anyone remember UUCP? Unix to Unix copy. It was an old school way of moving data around. We had UCP to IP customers that were handled through our sendmail CF file for some goddamn reason, and every one was some bespoke entry, and we have like 400 of them. We had like 400 UCP customers. It was insanity. Anyway, Matt was a wonderful dude. He didn't talk that much. He was very technically talented. And if I were to interview him for this would probably just be the pull quote I would use anyway. So before I get any farther, I do want to give a primer on internet networking. Not a primer, because primer is shit you put on the wall. A primer is a thing to help you learn. Sorry. And what movie is that? Contact, right? She actually says it correctly. I'm like, thank God, you know, because every other movie says primer, like they're painters. So we connect to. Yeah, I'm very judgy about that shit. Pronounce your words right, you bastages. So there's a bunch of different ways to connect networks together for the analog to digital connections that we often rely upon. We use things called modems. The modulator demodulator is a thing that takes digital signal, converts it to an analog waveform, or conversely picks up the analog waveform and converts it to digital. It's a transition between two mediums. We have a dial-up modem, a DSL modem, and cable modem. Only one of these is really in wide-scale use today. On the other side, we have digital devices. We have a TSU up top, which is a combination of a CSU and a DSU. It basically handles the configuration as well as the passing of the bits for a T1. And then this is just a rack-mountable DS3 concentrator. So there's a bunch of coaxial circuits on the back that you would haul in for large-scale data transfer. So this becomes important because in the early days of the internet, your equipment selection mattered a bunch as to how successful you were going to be. The story I'm telling you today happened in under 10 years, right? We went from 1990, no dial-up anywhere in the world unless you were in Boston, to pretty common broadband access by 2000, 2001, right? The internet came to be a thing in 10 years. And the equipment selection that your service provider chose and the investments that they made determine how you as a consumer could connect up to their network, right? And in Alaska, which was the land of baling twine and duct tape, I will say people made some fairly interesting decisions. So first of all, modem technology came a long way. In 1990-ish time frame, we were transitioning from like 9600 baud and 14.4 connections up to 28.8 connections. And then each one of these, I mean, the phone systems, these are all different protocols to transfer data over analog phone lines. Ignoring those two, everything over here just used POTS lines, right? And all we did was get better at math and better at making silicon to shove more bits over exactly the same infrastructure, right? The switch telephone network, it was circuit switch networks, right, were never designed to do what we asked them to do in the 90s. And it was a complete bastardization of the technology that allowed us to send data. It wasn't fast, but non-zero data is better than zero data, and so we got pretty good with it. And so we went through this transition. We went from 14.4 to 28.8, and somebody got super cute and figured out 33.6, right? It's like a 15% juice that got squeezed out of that lime to get us from 28.8, and it was like, people were like, oh my God. And that was largely the end of it. This was 56K. Who here had a 56K modem? Awesome. You probably need to go see your doctor. It's so funny. There's so many things like that this weekend. Like, oh yeah, and that's a sign that you're old. Yeah, cool. We'll touch on how those came to be and how we got that quantum leap. But it turns out it wasn't just a POTS line. So the other thing I want to make sure that we all remember, and if you weren't around, I tell you, your computer didn't have an IP stack, right? Like, there were not IP addresses on Windows 3.1. You had to buy or get a third-party piece of software, and the conventional one that everybody used was called Trumpet WinSock. And this is Mac TCP, because up until System 8 in MacLand, there was no IP stack on that. So when you wanted to connect to the internet, the first thing you had to do was get the software to allow you to connect to the internet, right? It is beyond belief in this day and age that you'd have to like install IP on your workstation. And so, like, the crazy thing about Trumpet WinSock, and I was trying to find stats about this and I couldn't, it was fucking shareware, right? It made the internet go around, and how many people ever put out their wallet and be like, I would like to give you your money for this, mister, I enabled the goddamn internet, right? Thorne, or whatever the hell his name was. Yeah. Did anyone ever pay for Windsock? Hey, you are the best person in the world, sir. Like, you are definitely like, the Pope should knight you or whatever the Pope does.
Did he also buy WinRAR?
So,
He needs a lime.
oh yeah. Can someone? I would throw this, but I feel like it would be a disservice to the university. Hey, you got a lime. Excellent. For the next one, I'll throw Tacitus. So, jeez. Anyway, so when I started working in Internet Alaska, it was 1995, and Windows 95 had not yet come out. And I was working help desk, and one of the first things I had to, what? It was 95?
What?
She's really bad at math. She's trying to figure out, we got married in 96, we were working at IA before then.
Were we?
Yes, 100%. Yeah. I'm pretty,
No.
yeah.
My email address at IA was wife Potter.
Oh, right, maybe we were. Anyways, 96 when I started there? Yeah, 96. Anyway, yeah. Oh, I know.
I get a lime.
Yeah, you get a lime. You get Tacitus. So actually, now that I think about it, at the university,
I got something right.
you did get it right. I worked at the university. I was the super nodie. We had a VAX VMS system and a bunch of nodes where people could access it, and I was the person who oversaw all that. And then I ended up overseeing a lot of the dial-up services there too. The help desk calls when someone who is not technically proficient and they're trying to install and debug Trumpet Windsock, right, was one. It's like trying to guide someone through like heart surgery over the phone. It was an incredibly difficult thing for people to do, and then invariably those people had other problems, right? Like because they couldn't figure out Windsock, and as soon as they're on the internet, they're like, now what? Like, oh God, I'm not your tutor, but they would call all the time. The help desk, working help desk at this time was absolutely a horrifying experience. Anyway, so. As I mentioned, the choice in what your provider installed mattered. And so Internet Alaska, Lance and Matt, the first thing they did was they just bought a bunch of courier modems, standard issue, whatever, got some POTS lines, plugged them in, and then worked with the phone company, got a hunt number, and were just like, hey, we're online, and that was that. And they had quality problems, like a lot of drop calls, people were getting inconsistent speeds, whatever, and that kind of thing. But this was the way a lot of ISPs got started all over the world, right? Buy some modems, plug them in. I mean, you think about people that used to run BBSs out of their house. It's the same deal, except just the ass end of it was IP going to the internet. And the ultimate example of this that I saw, so I ended up working in a company called NetTech. We did like cable installations in coal mines and all kinds of weird shit in Central Alaska. And in the building we were in above us was the Fairbanks ISP called PolarNet. PolarNet had bought, at one point, about 300 courier modems, cracked them open, took MDF and just rack-mounted the MDF, and then just jammed the courier modems in between there. And then they just built custom plug strips, like the length of this room, and then just plugged all these AC/DC adapters from the back end of the courier modems into these things. There were two exciting problems there. One of their customers was the Fairbanks Fire Marshal, and he showed up one day to pay his bill, and they had the door to the data center open, all that shit. And he's like, hey, fellas, when I come back to pay my bill next month, that won't be like that anymore. And they had to like clean up their stuff and buy some gear and whatever, because the fire marshal was like, this is all bad. The other thing that happened is they ate up all the POTS lines that came into this building, and so the Fairbanks phone utility had to pull in more POTS lines for them, and they didn't want to like drill a new penetration into the building, so they ran it up the downspout out of the parking lot into the roof, and then came down through like a duct that was on the roof. Now this worked great until the winter when it snows, and the guy with a snowplow came by and just boop, sheared off the 200 pair that was going up that thing. It took out half of their capacity. We're like, shit. And so we came to work that next day, and they're literally out there like these Scotch locks, these little press fit locks for telephone wire, like trying to red stripe with white, okay, click, and I was like, oh my God, what a Sisyphusian battle that was. So Lance and Matt decided this is all idiotic, and they decided to invest in technology from day one. From day two, after they realized they had these problems with reliability and stuff with the courier modems. They found these devices. This one's labeled Lucent, but Lucent bought the company. It's called Livingston. Livingston made these serial concentrators. They basically took all the serial, what would be the ass end of all these modems, brought them together, controlled them all, and dumped them out onto the internet. But instead of using a bunch of those USR modems, they use these USR modems. This is a USR total control rack. Every one of these was 4 modems, and you could just plug PRIs or T1s right in the back. And so you take digital service in the ass end of this thing and terminate the modem connection into a digital modem that lived in there. These are fully firmware upgradable, and then ultimately supported 56K. So if you are an old school ISP and everything was all POTS lines, the fastest you could do was 33.6. 56K connections actually relied on one end of it being digital. The subscriber side would be analog, because it has to be, but the provider side would have to be digital. And it was actually an asymmetric connection. Downstream to the subscriber was 56K, upstream could go up to about 45, but it all negotiated somewhere, right? And when IA and the 56K standards came out, one of the odd things was there were like competing standards for a while in different firmware. And so like you'd had to flash your modem all the time to get it to work, and we're having to communicate with our vendors like, we just flashed our modems, you should flash yours, and all kinds of shit. But anyway, Lance and Matt made the decision early to be poor and spend all their money on this stuff. So once they got up and running, and they had their POP up and running in Anchorage, it was on Lake Otis Drive in Anchorage originally, in a building that Lance says, quote, was never designed to hold all that stuff, and we had to do a lot of work to make sure things didn't fall through the floor, right? Because it is Alaska, right? Like, things are a little sketchy at times. Then they just started going around to user groups, and there are all kinds of technology user groups in Alaska at the time. There are 2 here. This is the Commodore and Amiga users group. This is where Todd, they met Todd Nigengast at the Amiga users group. Todd was a sysadmin at Internet Alaska. Oh, cool. And then this is a ham radio thing where Lance and Matt came and did a dog and pony. They went to the PC users group, the Mac users group. They made an internet users group just to like have a captive audience. And every time they would go to these things, they would get 3 or 4 calls the next day, and 3 or 4 calls the next day, and 3 or 4 calls the next day. And it got to the point where Matt and Lance and Tamis were literally like spending every evening putting together welcome packets that had trumpet windsock and instructions and all that, licking the envelope, putting it in the mail, getting it all going, wash, rinse, repeat every day, right? Every day, new subscribers, every day. It's like, imagine you decide to start an ISP out of your house today. They're doing the same thing. They're just literally just putting things in envelopes and sending them along. And that's how they built up to be 100, 300, 500, 1,000 users in Anchorage. And so they decided, like, we're going to go to an industry event and talk to other people who do this. So ISPCon still exists, which is actually kind of surprising, but it was like the big conference for people that wanted to help people connect to the internet. And Matt and Lance went to ISPCon, I think, for the first time in early '95. They had about 1,000 users in Anchorage. And what they found out is that they were the largest ISP there, right? Anchorage, Alaska was the largest ISP at ISPCon. They're like, what the hell? And what the reason why is that the barrier to entry in other parts of the country was very low. And so there were a lot of little tiny ISPs in like Houston and Atlanta and Boston and whatever. And there weren't these behemoths that we have today. And in Alaska, like, you know, it was just basically Internet Alaska, right? There was a couple other smaller ones, but for the most part, it was IA. And so they ended up being like the big dogs. And at the time, Earthlink was at the first one that they went to, and Earthlink became a very large ISP. They bought a bunch, whatever. Earthlink had 500 customers when they went to their first ISPCon, and they were like, oh, wow, we're huge, you know? But obviously, you have an addressable market problem when you're in Alaska. Like, you hit the wall of it. You're like, whoop, what? And that's everyone, right? So there's more than 1,000 people out there. There's 2,000 people live in the state. Anyway, so they got done with that, and they realized, like, hey, we probably need to find a way to grow. At the same time, this guy stopped by their office and was like, hey, heard you guys were starting this up. Tell me about it, whatever. Talked to him for a bit. It's like, so I'm applying for the job of CEO at the Alaska Telephone Utility, and I'd like to, when I get the job, I'd like to invest in you guys. And he's like, cool story, bro. Like, let's see how that turns out. Figured, like, this is just, well, there are crazy people in Alaska, period, right? And they would stop by and talk to you about things, period. This could just be like crazy dudes stop by, I'm going to be king of the world, you know, shit like that. It turns out, no, he really was, and he got the job, and then he rolled up and just like, boop, dropped the check, and it was like, so they sold him 30% of the company for $210,000. So they took that check and they immediately turned it around and they started to build out infrastructure around the state. And so the first thing that they did is they went to Juneau and Soldotna and Kenai, and I think that might have been it initially, and made the investment there. At the time, PolarNet was the big dog in Fairbanks, the ones with the snowplow problem. They didn't want to go to Fairbanks initially because they're like, PolarNet's got that covered. We're not going to bother up there. GNOME, which isn't that big, but it's had GNOME.net. I think GNOME.net still exists. They were the big provider out there. They're like, they didn't want to go into markets where there was already some other organization. They just wanted to go to markets where they were net new. It's easier, and they weren't going to make an enemy from jump. And so they took all that money that they got from ATU and immediately turned it in and invested it in infrastructure in new locations. So over time, we ended up in Homer, which is where felons running from the law go to live. Seriously, that's like half of the fucking population of Homer or felons running from the law. We did end up in Fairbanks. We ended up in Glen Ellen for some goddamn reason. Glen Ellen, the population of Glen Ellen would fit into this room. I don't know. I think Matt might have had a cabin there and just wanted better internet. I have no clue why we were there.
I think that's right.
I think it actually is right, yeah. And then we ended up in Petersburg, Alaska, which is a little tiny fishing village that we ended up at for some reason. I went down, Petersburg, for some reason, was like my pop, and I did a lot of the installation work there. Several quick stories. One, I went down there once. Our gear was at the public radio station, which was just some random house that had been donated to the public radio folks down there. And our gear was just like in a little half rack underneath the break room table in the kitchen. And so I rolled in one day, and the guy comes out of the DJ booth, a.k.a. the first floor bedroom, and he's like, oh, you were here with Internet Alaska? I'm like, yeah, I got to do some work. I'm going to take the network down and get some stuff upgraded. He's like, oh, give me a second. And he keys the mic and says, Internet Alaska's here. If you're here, log off because they're going to do something. And I look at the modem bank, and all the lights go off. And I was like, I guess this is the only game in town, huh? He's like, yep, sure is. So about 10 minutes later, this woman said, I heard you were coming into town. I baked you a pie. And I'm like, I love Alaska. Like, this is some crazy shit. Also, the school district wanted to buy service from us, and they were directly next to the public radio station. But I got into what I would best describe as a confrontational situation with the guy who ran the telco down there, to the point where he on the phone called and said, "I'm coming down there to fucking shiv you." And I was like, "Okay, this is not going well." And I told the guy at the radio station, like, "Oh no, he's serious. We should call the cops." I'm like, "Okay," so we called the cops. And so, like, this guy is not going to sell me a circuit to go to the high school. So we worked with the principal, and he bought like outdoor rated cable. And under the cover of darkness, we ran a cable out of the public radio building up on a public telephone pole across the public right of way, all of which is completely illegal, down and into his office, into the high school or the school. And then we put a router there, and then we back to back 2 TSUs and ran a fractional T1 across it, so we could control. That's the only way we could control the bandwidth. And that's how the Petersburg School District had their internet for years, was this clandestine Ethernet connection out the window of a fucking radio station, so I wouldn't get killed by the guy from the telco. So networking in Alaska. Anyway, so our long haul connection started out as a 56K circuit and ultimately became kind of in the middle of the story, 2 T1s. The T1s were terrestrial in the sense they were fixed microwave. There was only one fiber optic cable up until 1999 that left Linwood, Washington, and came up the coast. And it was a 45 megabit cable that was completely sold out, basically, when they pulled the cable in the late 80s. So there was no available terrestrial bandwidth. Internet Alaska ended up buying their loops off of the Anchorage Telephone Utilities long distance arm, basically took it away from their customers for voice and sold it to IA for data for $17,500 a month per circuit just for the loop. And then we still had to pay IP charges to where they landed in the lower 48. So we're almost 40 grand a month just to have 2 T1s for microwaves going all the way down. And when that happened, we ramped up to about 20,000 users on 2,000 modems on 2 T1s. And this is what our MRTG graph looked like 24 hours a day. Like, if it literally, there was ever any white space, like, something's broken. Because There's always demand. Because we also ran like a Usenet server, and that thing was just snarfing down everything. We had all kinds of, I mean, it was an insane amount of data. We spent a lot of energy trying to figure out caching and doing kind of close to subscriber caching to limit bandwidth utilization. Paul Vixie, who many of you may know through Bind and DNS fame, started a caching company for a while because he thought like, hey, this is going to be a big thing and we should invest in it. And we were one of the early beta testers for Vixie's caching stuff. I think somewhere on a token, I still have Paul Vixie's public SSH key because I think that's super cool and nerdy for some reason. But anyway, so at some point they had the realization like, hey, there's a house here and a house here, both in Anchorage, on 2 different ISPs. And the data is going to like Minneapolis, Chicago, Seattle, and back around. So to go 50 feet, it's going basically an around the world journey on the order of a second and a half of latency. So we ended up standing up the AMAP, Anchorage Metropolitan Area Peering Point or something like that. Maybe there were 2 Ps, which is basically a spare 2900 that Matt had lying around. And we threw it in our data center. And we're like, yo, if you want, you can come peer with us. And some of the local ISPs did because they're like, hey, cool, that'll save me bandwidth. And some of them are like, that seems awfully communist, you know, like why would I help you? It's like, I don't know if you know this, but we're the big dogs. And if you want to survive, you should probably come and drag a line to this thing. So we ended up with like 5 or 6 local ISPs. And now you could actually play online games with your friends in Anchorage and not have to be all in the same ISP. So that was pretty cool. The AMAP has since dissolved and is dead. There's now the Alaska Ix. And a few others, but obviously we engineer the internet differently now than we used to anyway. But at the time, it was pretty revolutionary. One place that we didn't end up was Unalaska. This is like the entirety of Unalaska. Like, just to be clear, like this is like Petersburg's maybe twice this size. These are small towns, right? I mean, these parts of Alaska are remote. They're tiny. They're important to the state, but they're not very big. So Lance decided they were going to go to Unalaska. They bought the gear. And they were ready to go. And so what they were doing is the same play they had done before, which basically we're going to go talk to people and get people to sign up. So they bought a bunch of advertisements in the newspaper a week ahead of time. And then Lance was going to fly out for like a Friday evening thing at the library, have some snacks or whatever, and could talk to people about the internet. Because again, nobody had the internet, right? This is 1996.
That's what we did.
Yeah.
Eventually, I did that.
Yeah, and like Heidi did that to like for like Valdez and places like that. And so Lance goes to get on the plane, and he's talking to this guy in the plane. I mean, again, it's Alaska. The plane would fit in this room. It was not a very large plane. He's sitting on the plane talking to this guy. He's like, hey, what are you doing? He's like, oh, explains the whole thing. He's like, oh, when did you take those ads out? He's like, I took the ads out like last week. He's like, oh, so I don't know if you noticed, but there's been a storm out in the Aleutians, and nothing's flown in. This is literally the first plane that's flown to Unalaska since last week, and the papers that you took your ads out are right there. And they're like turned around, they're right behind them. He's like, I don't think anyone's going to be at your meeting. And sure shit, no one was at the meeting. And Lance went there, just ended up hanging out at a bar talking to people, and was like, fuck it, and flew back, and we never went to Unalaska. So that was the Unalaska that never was. Valdez, where Heidi went and did some evangelization, that was another expansion where they actually didn't intend to go to Valdez. They had some really rich dude in Valdez call them up and be like, hey, you should come out here and do this. Like, not in the cards, dude. We don't have the capital. He's like, what if I just bought it for you? Would you do it then? And the guy's, yeah, of course. And the guy, what do you need? Hands him the thing. A couple weeks later, all the gear shows up. Circuit gets provisioned. Heidi and a bunch of people go to Valdez and start signing up people in Valdez because some dude just wanted his own private connection, basically. So that's how that went down. There are a couple interesting things about how advanced Alaska was or Anchorage was when it came to internet access. That CEO of ATU went to a telecommunications industry event. He came back from it in like early 96. And he said, we are the first metropolitan city in the nation where our highest call volume is not during the business hours, right? If you looked at the mid-90s and you look at call volume distribution, most calls were made immediately after lunch, before people fell asleep and had their nap, right? Like, it was like they had lunch, they're like, shit, I should do something productive. They make their phone calls, and the peak time for most calls in most cities is between 1 and 2 o'clock. In Anchorage, that's the way it used to be, and then it transitioned to 7 p.m. because people went home and they got on the internet, and the calls were long, and most people were dialing in, right? And so other cities followed in shortly behind it, but to our knowledge, Anchorage was the first one that tipped that teeter-totter. Very technically advanced town for its remote nature and that kind of thing. The other thing that happened around the same time is that we and all the other local ISPs were having problems with stable connections, not getting busy signals, basically loading up the switches to the point that people couldn't terminate calls to our facilities. And the reason kind of boils down to, like, as they had engineered the network, they assumed about 80% of their calls would be voice and 20% would be data. And these are like person-to-person voice, not like to a hunt group or that kind of thing. And IA had scaled so fast, it was totally breaking that model. So the CEO called Lance about 2 or 3 weeks after he had gone to this industry event and said, "Okay, we just re-engineered our whole network, so now we're set up for 80% data and 20% voice, because our presumption is most people and more people are going to be making these calls, and we want to make it reliable for you." He's like, "Oh, cool. When did that start?" He's like, "This morning." And we re-engineered the whole telephone network 4 times today. The phones didn't work a couple times, but we got it figured out. They basically broke the entire phone system for the city of Anchorage and ended up making it so that it was all biased toward data services. And I don't know enough about like 5ESS engineering to know exactly the internals, but the CEO was like very specifically, it was 80-20, now it's 20-80. All your numbers should work. All your customers will have a good experience. It's like, wow, that's pretty cool. It's nice to be close and cuddly with the utility. This is Ted Stevens. I don't recommend cuddling Ted. Ted Stevens and his family basically ran the state. He was a senator and he had a lot of juice. At some point, I think in 97 or 98, Ted decided that this internet thing had to be metered and taxed and all that kind of stuff because he was a good Republican. We were gonna put some screws to this fucking thing. So he came out with a proposal. He led a proposal in Congress to meter all internet access. And Lance did a thing where he went through and he itemized all the connections and everything and posted a letter on the IA website and was like, "Hey, just so you know, if Ted Stevens' thing passes, your $20 a month internet service will cost on average $140 a month." Just throwing that out there. And the next day, Ted Stevens' chief of staff calls Lance and was like, "What the fuck are you doing?" He's like, "Well, I'm doing exactly what I need to do to survive as a business." He's like, "You can't do this to us." He's like, "Well, find fault in what I've done." Couldn't, and eventually Stevens pulled the bill and saved the whole country actually from dumbass metered internet. So that was kind of cool. We built the first DSL network in the state. Well, there was 2. One, there was an IDSL network, which is not hard to build if you have ISDN because you fucking leave it on all the time basically, and it works. But we built the first ADSL network. The telcos, as much as they were on our side, they weren't really believers, and they didn't really want cheap fixed line internet access because they were making money selling T1s and stuff. And so we ended up buying a bunch of alarm circuits with no load coils, which is basically a piece of 4-wire copper from point A to point B with nothing in between. And it's just like the DSL setup over there. You just turn the dials until you get errors and then back it off and be like, "Congratulations, you have a 384 connection. We'll charge you $100. Does that seem reasonable? Cool." And like everyone was bespoke. And eventually ATU got wind of this and they were kind of pissed off. And they're like, "What are you doing? Are you an alarm company?" We're like, "No, cute story. We're doing fixed DSL services." And they got cranky, and then the Alaska Public Utility Commission got involved, and they were potentially going to rate limit us down so you couldn't do high-speed signaling over alarm circuits. And then when they all came to terms and everything worked, and ATU decided to install DSLAMs, and we provided the IP services, and everyone was happy. Huzzah. So, but it was all done under the cover of darkness without the telephone company knowing. If you need to provision point-to-point DSL between you and your friends in your neighborhood, it turns out you can. You can buy a $20 alarm circuit with no load coils, hook up some modems, and have your own clandestine network. You can still do it today. It's wonderful. And it's cheap. Something else that we did, and I'll hustle through because I know I don't have a lot of time. There was a point in time we thought everybody in the world is going to have their own basic data center in their home, right? You're going to do your own shit. You're going to have your own mail server, your own web server, your own presence. It's just like a refrigerator, right? Everyone's going to have their own thing. This is a device developed by a guy in Denmark called the Whistle Interjet. And it ran FreeBSD. It had a mail server, SMB server, web server, firewall, bunch of shit, games, all kinds of things. And it was all configured through the buttons on the front. You didn't have to be a wizard to do it. You'd plug it in. It had a modem built in, the whole deal. And we were a reseller of these things, and potentially the largest reseller in the world, because no one else had drank the same Kool-Aid that we drank, including the people in the Netherlands where this guy lived, where they sold 50, right? We probably sold 50 of those a month. So it was a neat adventure, but this is like the experimental time of the internet. Again, this is 1998, 99 when we were selling these things. There was no dial-up internet 4 years prior, right? This all happened so fast. It's unbelievable. And everyone was trying to figure out where it was going to go. We're like, oh, of course, everyone's going to want to be a system administrator in their own home. Yeah, no. So if you couldn't tell, that starts to become the beginning of the end of the whole story. So a few things happened. One, our billing system died, like fucking cratered into the ground with no backups. Literally had no clue who our customers were. None. If your password worked and you dialed up, you were a customer, right? And so this is actually the running gag of like AT&T back in the day. Like 60% of your long distance bill was the glory of them billing you, and 40% was the actual long distance service, right? Like it was very expensive to figure out how to bill people back when you cared about metered access. What we ended up doing is we get, from the radius servers, we get stop and start records for every connection. And so Lance had a script that he would run, and it was just like this monster fucking script that would chew through and try to figure out who was on the network. And every few months, he would just send them a bill and be like, hey, you owe us $60. And most of the time, people were like, oh yeah, I haven't seen a bill from you in a while, I'll pay. And other times, be like, how about I give you 20? You know, and you get to negotiate with these people. And so we went through this back and forth, and eventually they got a billing system that worked again. But there was a year where this company that was growing and had gone from 10 people to 45 to like 90 employees, and we were the predominant internet service provider in the state of Alaska. We had no billing system except for the founder running some Perl scripts. Right? It was unfucking believable how messed up it was. At the same time, GCI, which was the cable company up there, decided they were going to start bundling cable internet with cable service. We lost 20% of our customers almost overnight as part of that, right? That's going to be bad news for dial-up internet, right? Not everybody could get cable, but man, if you could get high-speed internet pretty cheap, and they were very interested in us not being in business. And so they were very aggressive about pricing, about access, and that kind of thing. So GCI made our life very difficult. And then kind of at the same time, we knew more internet was coming up. They completed 2 cables, one in 99 and one in 07 that, I don't know, by a factor of 50 increased the terrestrial bandwidth capabilities in Alaska. And so we knew that there was the change was on the horizon. On top of that, and the undocumented part of this, is that we hired a new CFO, and he wasn't very good at paying his bills. And we got a call one day, and basically they said from ATU, and they said, you owe us $1 million because you haven't paid us in a year. And if you don't give it to us, we're going to shut down all your circuits. Oh, what? And that's when we found out the CFO was a touch crooked and hadn't been paying the bills. So they had to go basically do an immediate fire sale of the company. So ACS, Alaska Communication System, actually bought ATU, the telephone company, in '99. This all came to light in late '99, early 2000, and by the middle of 2000, the company ceased to exist and been sold for a fire sale price to ACS. And that was the end of Internet Alaska. So that was a 6-year arc to go from, hey, I think we should put some modems in our living room, to having built an ISP the size of most countries, and then crater into the ground due to standard issue business practices. So it was a fascinating journey, and I'll do a couple of quick takeaways because I know I'm basically out of time. Because you're like, what does this have to do with cybersecurity? Well, it was good storytelling nonetheless. First of all, technology changes, right? We need to be ready to adapt to this. What struck me this year at DEF CON, the Cyber Grand Challenge was at DEF CON a number of years ago, and it was basically, let's make computers play CTFs, let's get them smart on it. And I was involved in that space. I wasn't involved directly in CGC, but I was involved in other research in that domain at the time. And it was like hard computer science, low level, like understanding how these things work and think, and way down into the weeds of compilers and all kinds of stuff. And then this year, it's just like, YOLO, I'm just going to throw a bunch of code at like a freaking LLM and see what vulnerabilities it finds. Woo, woo, woo. And like 5 minutes later, it pops out a bunch of vulnerabilities and attacks it and does all the things. Nobody in the CGC universe 6 years ago envisioned like just, hey, look, it worked, you know, as like the spray and pray AI method of vulnerability discovery. Turns out vulnerability discovery is perfect for systems that aren't right all the time, because vulnerability discovery isn't right all the time either, right? You find all kinds of things that aren't vulnerabilities. AIs just make up shit. Sometimes they find real things. Hey, works out great. Nobody saw that coming. Completely transformative for vulnerability analysis. Community is very important, and I think in cybersecurity we've all seen events like this, like ShmooCon, like DEF CON, whatever we go to, we commune, we talk, there's fellowship, we learn. It's great. It's the same thing that we did up in Alaska. We got together, there was like Linux people and FreeBSD nerds and whatever, but that's how we all got smarter, that community built. And we built an amazing network on the basis of our relations with these communities. Your fate's tied to others. That's an easy one. I'm going to skip that one. The underlying thing that I learned, and this is the end of the talk, the people matter, right? Like Lance gave me, Heidi, a bunch of our friends, people who became our friends, an opportunity to learn and grow. They armed us with just enough knowledge, just enough responsibility to have to push ourselves to do the thing that we needed to do to build this network, to do the things that we wanted to do for the state. Those people were incredible critical thinkers. They were curious. They were all a little weird. Like to a T, we were all a little off center. But man, like we got shit done. There was no basis for us being successful, right? Our internet connection was pegged all the time. Our authentication server was pegged all the time. The mail spool was falling down. Like there was so much baling twine and duct tape that kept this thing together. 2 Spark servers ran the whole thing, and those things were just holding on by their teeth every single goddamn day. But through like force of will and smart people, we made it work. And I was always amazed when I went to go meet my counterparts in the lower 48, like the comedy of riches. Like they had real data centers and racks of servers, right? Like we had 2 servers on the floor, right? Like you had a rack, that's fancy. It was unbelievable how much we got done with so little. And the people that were there have gone on to do really amazing and interesting things. I think because of that, the trust and the opportunity that Lance and Matt gave us. Some of us stayed very technical. One of our friends went down and ran all the systems for WetFX for Lord of the Rings down in New Zealand. One of them became an author and lives in Ireland writing fantasy stuff and whatever. But it was an amazing group of people. It was certainly formative for Heidi and I to have had that opportunity. And Internet Alaska and the state of Alaska wouldn't have been the same if it wasn't for that team. So this is my homage to them, and thanks to everybody that I got to work with and that kind of thing. And I won't take questions because we're out of time. I want to be respectful to the next folks. So thank you very much for coming.